This video is about the life of Marcus Garvey, his goals and ideals, and how he influenced the Harlem Renaissance. Marcus Garvey was born the 17th of August, 1887, in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. His family was moderately wealthy, of Afro-Jamaican descent. He apprenticed in the print trade before working in Kingston, where he would become involved in trade unionism, labor unions, joining the Printers Union in 1908, then the National Club in 1910. He would briefly live in Costa Rica, Panama, and England before returning to Jamaica in 1914. At the time, Jamaica was a colony under British rule, while the colonial government under Governor John Peter Grant tried to introduce reforms in the country. They were not enough to keep the colony from struggling. Many Jamaicans were unemployed and impoverished. This led to unrest, with many wishing for further political reforms within the colony. In 1914, Marcus Garvey created UNIA-ACL, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, with the goal of advancing the lives of people of African descent. In 1916, Marcus Garvey traveled to the United States. He came to New York City, where in 1918, he created the New York division of UNA in Harlem, where his legacy really began. Marcus had many ideas and beliefs. He emphasized the unity of Africans and advocated for the end of colonial rule in Africa and the unification of the continent. He envisioned Africa as a one-party state run by himself that would ensure black racial purity. He also supported the Back to Africa movement, saying that his members should migrate to the continent, specifically Liberia. His ideals were viewed as radical and extreme by other civil rights activists, with him being viewed as a black separatist. His relations with the KKK and their goal of racial separatism caused a rift to form between him and fellow civil rights activists, who instead promoted racial integration. Believing that black people should be financially independent from white society, Garvey created several businesses in 1919 within the United States. They included the Negro Factories Corporation, the Negro World newspaper, and the Black Star Line. Black Star Line, in particular, was created to link America to Africa and help with the migration of African Americans to Liberia. However, it never could fulfill this goal, and instead mainly did trips to important historical ports in the Caribbean and on the East Coast. During the Harlem Renaissance, he held many parades, one being where this famous photo was taken of a man holding a sign stating, "The new Negro has no fear." By 1920, there were over 1,900 divisions in as many as 40 countries, spanning North America, Latin America, the Caribbean, and even South America. Most were located in the United States, which had become UNA's home country. The organization held parades, meetings, elected officials, and wrote documents, with Garvey even being given the ceremonial title of Provisional President of Africa. But the control he held of the organization only lasted for so long. In 1923, Garvey was convicted of mail fraud for selling company stock for a ship they did not yet own for Black Star Line. Though he was bailed out at first, he was still jailed in the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta in 1925 and stayed there for nearly 2 years. Many believe the trial was politically motivated, as he had rivals within UNA, Black Star Line, and the US government. Garvey blamed Jewish people, saying that they were against him because of his relationship with the KKK. In 1927, his sentence was commuted by President Calvin Coolidge. He was deported to Jamaica shortly after, as this was a compromise to keep those against Garvey happy. His presidency of UNA came to an end in 1926 when George Weston succeeded him. This angered many of Garvey's followers, but being in prison, and then in another country far away from the organization's headquarters, Marcus Garvey couldn't do much about the decision. He did, however, continue to run some of the organization's operations within Latin America, though the governments there often prevented him from doing so. Living in Kingston, He would establish the People's Political Party in 1929. He served briefly as a city councilor as well. During this time, he traveled to various places in Europe and the Americas, speaking about his beliefs. He began to struggle financially by 1930, as most of his previous income had been from his followers, which by now had mostly dried up. His finances continued to worsen in the 1930s, due in part to the Great Depression. He was also charged and even imprisoned several times by political figures within Jamaica. These factors led to him having to work other jobs in order to keep him and his family afloat. His struggle eventually led to him mortgaging his house and other properties, with some being auctioned off. Dissatisfied with his life, he decided to move to London, leaving for the country in 1935. He told his friend Amy Bailey that he had, quote, left Jamaica a broken man, broken in spirit, broken in health, and broken in pocket. And I will never, never, never go back. In London, Garvey wanted to build UNA on the British Isles. Though he faced competition with other civil rights groups already established there, he had some membership, but never really built a significant presence in England, as his conservative ideals were not popular with socialist Londoners. In 1935, he spoke out against the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, being against the Italian invasion. He initially supported the then leader of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, but after he fled his country, he thought of him as a coward. He attended several UNA meetings in other countries in 1937, mainly in Canada. His family visited him as well at this time, coming from Jamaica, though by now, being 50 years old, his health had begun to decline, with him suffering from severe rheumatism, a form of arthritis, and other conditions. In January 1940, he suffered a stroke that left him mostly paralyzed. He was cared for by his secretary, Daisy White, until he suffered another massive stroke. This proved to be fatal, as he died on June 10, 1940. Multiple memorials were held for Garvey, mainly in New York and in Kingston. A parade of mourners was held in Harlem for his memorial service. Some Garveyites didn't believe he died, even when presented with photographs of his body. He was buried in London in the catacombs of St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery. His death seemed to have created what writer Richard Hart described as a veritable cult in his memory for the next decade. Politicians in Jamaica would invoke his name, and many called for his body to be returned to Jamaica. These were fulfilled in 1964, and his remains were moved to King George VI Memorial Park. Thousands came to see him be reburied, and a ceremony befitting a national hero was held. Garvey is remembered today as a radical black separatist by some, and a civil rights hero by others. No matter what your view is on his ideology, he and his organization had a great influence on the social and political side of black history in several places. He did try to fulfill his goal, creating companies to hire black individuals and seeking a country solely for his people, both of which succeeded in some ways. While his ideas were viewed as extreme by other civil rights activists, they did help with his goal of the advancement of African Americans' lives. And that was the life of Marcus Garvey. And now, here's some bloopers of the failed voiceovers I did, because this was really hard for some reason. Marcus had many ideas and beliefs. He emphasized the unity of Africans and advocated for the end of colonial rule in Africa and the unification of the continent. He envisioned... God damn it. In 1916, Marcus Garvey traveled to the United States before coming to the... His ideals were viewed as radical and extreme by other racial... There's no racial in there. How did I say? Marcus had many ideas and beliefs. He emphasized the unity of Africans and advocated for the end of colonial rule in Africa and the unification of the continent. Continent? How? How? Ah! Marcus had many ideas and beliefs. He empathized It's emphasized. Marcus had many ideas and beliefs. He emphasized. I did it again!